Hello, my name is Kate Wilson from the Bridport Prize Creative Writing Competition, and I'm delighted to be here today with the writer Cathy Rentzenbrink. Cathy, welcome. It's lovely to be speaking with you.
It's very nice to be here.
Thank you. For those of you who don't yet know Cathy's work, she is the author of The Last Act of Love, A Manual for Heartache, Dear Reader, and the novel Everyone is Still Alive. Her latest book, Write It All Down, How to Put Your Life on the Page, was published in January this year. Cathy regularly chairs literary events, interviews authors, reviews books, runs creative writing courses, and speaks and writes on life, death, love, and literature. In addition to this, she's going to be the judge for our new Memoir Prize, which we'll be launching in June. Cathy's going to be answering questions sent in by writers, but before we get to some of those, I just wanted to chat about what a memoir actually is and why people write them. Cathy, there are lots of reasons someone may want to write a memoir. To learn more about your family and its history, a search for personal identity, to gain a greater insight into the past perhaps, or to heal from a traumatic experience. Your memoir, The Last Act of Love, is about the life and death of your younger brother, Matty. Could you tell us how and why you came to write that book?
Yes, I could. I've got it here, actually. I always find when I'm talking about books, it certainly helps me to have them as props. You can see, look, this is my reading copy with all my marked pages. So yes, this is a book about my brother, Matty. And also you can see that's me on the front cover with him. I wrote it because I couldn't find a way, really. I didn't know what to do with how I felt about what had happened. So he was knocked over by a car when he was 16 and I was 17, and then he was alive in a persistent vegetative state for another 8 years, and then my parents and I had to go to the family court and ask for permission to bring his life to an end, which we did. At one point I couldn't actually even say those facts without kind of collapsing and sobbing and crying. After that happened, I made various attempts to sort of try to, get on with life, and sometimes had some success in that. But I always felt that it was just a story. I just didn't know what to do with it, and I felt stuck in it. I had always wanted to write. I wanted to write novels. I wanted to write light, funny novels, and I often tried to write What Happened to Matty as a novel and couldn't manage that. I would often try to write novels about things that weren't about him, and then he would somehow arrive on the page wanting to take over. And then eventually I decided again to have another go, and then at that point I did finish a book about him, and that was when I was 42. So I think it's quite interesting to me. One of the things I think is interesting about memoirs, often there is a long gap between the events in the memoir and the amount of life that's passed since the writer feels ready to kind of confront and reckon with what's happened in the past. I still think the main, and obviously then it did become a book, and lots of positive things happened to me because of that, including having readers and becoming a writer. I still think the single best thing about it was that I did it, that I managed to finish even if it had never been a book. I think the fact that I'd managed to finish something I could have printed out, I could have printed out the Word document and put it in a binder and put it somewhere in the room, and I got it from the inside of me into the outside of me, and I think those were all really good things to do. So that's one of the stories of my story, the story of The Last Act of Love.
Oh, that's really fascinating, and it's really interesting you say that there was such a long gestation period, and I suppose there is a point where things are too fresh and too painful and you can't write about them, and it's all you want to do is sort of sit and cry, and there has to be that gap to not really stand back from the event. You can't stand back from something that's so has coloured your whole life, but it gives you a bit more perspective on something, which is really interesting.
Well, I often think, I tried other ways of processing it. I had, shed loads of therapy, which was often very good, and I also, was drunk for about a decade. So I tried other ways. But definitely for me, not that those other ways didn't, some of the, and I'm really pro therapy. I'm not at all saying you should write a memoir and then you don't need to have any other help. But certainly for me, something about wrestling wrestling it all into a sequential narrative, I think was, healing, I suppose.
As a memoir writer, it seems you have a great responsibility to the people who feature in your work, whether they're still with us or not. And we've had a few questions in sort of around that responsibility to other people. And I wonder if I could, it seems like a good time to ask a question from one of the ones you had around that subject. This is from Helen Barrett, who says she's really enjoying your book, Write It All Down, and wants to know, how do I hide, she says, how do I hide the people in my memoir so that they don't sue me for libel or slander when they've read my book? Which I wonder what she's saying about them. But is there
yeah, it's a big question, and there are a lot of big complex questions with memoir, and that question I think is probably the biggest. You do have to take it seriously, your obligations to other people. But the way I tend to think of it is that I think the worst thing that would happen would be that worrying about that would stop you writing. And certainly that's what I most experience in terms of talking to other people who want to write, is that it's that the worry of what they do about the real people in their book stops them making any progress in it. So one of my kind of like quite radical suggestions for how you do it is just write the whole thing just for yourself without worrying about the other people. And again, sometimes people think like, but why would I write a whole book not knowing if I can get it published? It's like, well, you don't know whether that'll happen anyway. So one of the difficulties about, and I wouldn't have known this, I don't think, if I hadn't written books, because of course I used to do that. One of the many reasons I used to stop and give up was because I couldn't work out what to do with the real people in the book. But one of the things with trying to work that out in advance, so what often happens is people think like, when I've sorted out what I'm going to do about the fact that I can't tell the truth about this, and this, then I'll start writing my book. And in my experience, people just get really stuck. They get stuck in worrying about it. And I would suggest a different way to think about it is, I'm going to write my story. The first draft is going to be only for me. I'm going to tell the complete and utter warts and all truth about myself and about everyone else. When I've got that manuscript, I'm then going to ask myself some very rigorous questions about whether I want to share it at all, how I want to share it, and what I'm going to do about the people in it. The other good thing about doing that is quite often people really radically change their minds about, quite often the action of writing the memoir, again, and people are always amazed by this, including me, but people are amazed by the extent to which writing the memoir isn't just a case of writing down what they know, that writing the memoir changes the way they think about things. So I have now worked with 3 people who basically decided they would write the book just for themselves because they thought they would never be able to share it with anyone, and with all 3 of them, it was because of the mother, because of their relationship with their mother. And anyway, I encouraged them just to write it anyway. And with all 3 of these people, their relationship, writing the book has really changed their relationship with their mother. In all 3 cases, they're able to see the mother with more compassion, kind of slightly like see the mother as more of a victim as well, as a, more sinned against than sinning. But the writing the book has changed the way they feel. And again, in all 3 cases, it's really positively impacted. It's rescued that relationship, kind of irrespective of what else has happened. I always feel really wary about saying this because it's difficult to grasp, I think, until you've experienced it or seen it. And I'm obviously not saying, write a book about the difficult people in your life and you might find that you like them after all. It's not as simple as that. But what I am saying is, just be open to the idea. One of the great gifts, one of the great benefits of writing a draft in private is that you are open to all kinds of possibilities, that the writing can kind of do its work on you. And you might end up not with the problems you thought you had. But equally, if you still have all those problems, and I have worked with people like that, often if, sometimes if someone involved in the story is, well, again, I don't really want to go into it, but sometimes like if there is some big legal thing, or if some of the people involved in the story might be actually dangerous or something, then sometimes it is the wisest thing to leave the manuscript in a drawer. But that, as a percentage of what happens, it doesn't happen very often that there isn't a way around it, or a way to think about it, or a way through it.
That's it's really interesting. It very much chimes with my own experience of trying to write about incidents in my own life, and how just the simple act of setting something on the page just makes you step outside your own experience somewhat, and you look at it from a totally different angle. And that was completely eye-opening to me, that actually does happen. I
mean, it often does. And again, we don't need to write full books to get the benefit of it. One of the I really love therapists. I find them so interesting to talk to. And one of the therapists I knew, I think she wanted, we were talking about this a bit, and she does this thing in therapy called 2-chair work, where you sit with an empty chair, and I think you kind of you imagine, then, like, you change chairs and you imagine seeing the situation from someone else's perspective. And I kind of started doing it myself, especially when I feel really hard done by in some kind of situation. And I'm like full of it, and I'm writing it down, and I'm so cross about this, and I'm so cross about that. Not, again, I don't write it down to share with anyone. I'm just journaling it. I'm so cross about this, I'm so cross about that. If I can ask myself the question, if I can think, okay, if I was outside this situation looking in, what advice would I give me? And actually, quite often the advice I would give myself would be something along the lines of, well, I can see why you're cross about that, but equally, like, why are you getting so wound up about it? It's not a surprise, doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of things, So I think all the sense of getting a different perspective on events is really helpful in kind of really small ways. And then also the big way of writing a memoir, because if you're writing a full memoir, I think, again, it's really helpful to know that what you're offering, though, is your perspective on events. And that's what I'm really clear on that with. And I wasn't when I was writing it, but I've learned that one of the ways in which I write books and stay sane is I'm really clear when I write something, whether it's a book or an article, I'm just giving my perspective on events. That's what I'm doing. I'm not trying to say that I'm definitively right about everything. I'm not trying to say this is the whole story of, even like, this is the whole story of my brother, or this is the whole story of this, or this is the whole story of that. I'm just making an offer. This is the way I saw this. And within that, you kind of allow other people to have their version of events. You allow that there might be other books written on the subject, written by someone else. If you, my friend Colin Grant's very funny on this, because he's written a lot about his family, and he's got, he wrote a book about his brother Christopher, who died. That's called The Smell of Burning. And he wrote a book about his father called Bag Eye at the Wheel. Both really excellent books. He's got quite a lot of siblings. I think he might have 6 surviving siblings, or he might be one of 6. But he likes to quote this Jamaican proverb, which is, there are no facts, there are only versions. And he also says as well that kind of ultimately he says to his siblings, like, this is my version of events. If you want to write your version of events, go off and write your own book. And I think that's quite, again, he knows where he is in the story. He knows what he's claiming, and all he's claiming for himself is my version of events.
Yeah, and memory is just, it's so unreliable anyway, isn't it? I mean, I've had real rows with my siblings about how we remember things as children. And I'm sure that my version of events is completely correct, and they're equally certain that their version of events is correct as well. But yeah,
endlessly fascinating.
It is endlessly fascinating, isn't it? Yeah. We've had quite a number of questions from people about the difference between memoir and autobiography, and I'm sure you can, with launching a new category, you have to predict some of the things that you're going to be asked, and have an FAQs that people can refer to. But I know there's going to be a lot of questions coming our way about autobiography and memoir, and how do I know what I'm writing, and what's the difference? So do you have a sort of a neat way of saying what is one and what is the other?
I mean, I have a way I look at it, which, again, I think it is helpful, really helpful, actually, almost especially at a beginning stage and then an editing stage, to know, I would suggest, to know that you're writing a memoir and not an autobiography. So autobiographies, I would say, they're the soup to nuts version of a life, the A to Z version of a life, that I was born on this day and this date, mean, sometimes a few chapters about your grandparents. This happened, and then this happened, and that happened, like the story of a whole life in its entirety. Usually only written really by famous people, people of note, people that where people are interested in that whole thing. Personally, I don't find them interesting, because what I do love is, what a memoir is it's not the whole story, it's an aspect. It's not the whole life, it's an aspect of the life. So it's a particular event or a particular theme, or even it's the lens through which you view a life. So so again, with The Last Act of Love, it's the story of my brother, and it's the story of my brother and his sister. So the story of what happened to my brother as seen by me, and the story of the impact that that had on me. And it's that. There are other things. There are things about my parents and things about, and because it was such a big and overwhelming thing, there are other bits of life, but still it's really the story of what happened to him. And lots of stuff that was in there, because again, writing your first book, it's difficult to get a handle on this. So you just shove everything in. I call it kitchen sinking it. You just kind of, oh, I'll just chuck that in and chuck it. And then you take it all out, because you think, actually, the lens through which I'm viewing my life is my life as it was impacted by my relationship with my brother and his death. But then I wrote Dear Reader, The Comfort and Joy of Books. And that's a thematic memoir. So that has got life writing in it, but all viewed through the prism of being a reader. So again, the only stuff that's in here is stuff that is in some way relevant to my reading life. Some others that I like, I mean, I think this is a really nice, I love Bluets by Maggie Nelson. Again, quite an extreme example. Everything here is filtered through her love of the color blue. So that's kind of like quite an extreme example of what lens, a lens through which you're viewing a life. And then another really good example of a thematic memoir is I Am by Maggie O'Farrell, subtitle 17 Brushes of Death. So again, it's a memoir, but the lens through which she's looking at her life is the times when she's most been in contact with death. What's really helpful as a beginner memoirist to get a handle on this is because then you can kind of save yourself the problem of writing like 8 chapters of everything that happened when you were at school, so that then later on someone like me will tell you to edit out because they're not relevant to what the memoir is actually about. Having said all that, you do, I think, have to write, I think you have to write quite a lot just to kind of like find your voice. So you might still write a lot, but in any work, I was explaining this to someone recently, again, a really interesting woman I was helping, and she's fantastic. She's had such a rich life, so much has happened to her. I said, really, it's a case of, you could write 17 books. You know, there's loads of books here, but what will probably help you is to work out which one you're going to do first. Because when we start writing a memoir, the temptation is to think, this is my memoir. And kind of like this, so all our books will be called My Memoir, subtitle, everything that's ever happened to me and everything I've ever thought about anything ever. And most first draft memoirs kind of would have that title. And then you're working out, okay, well, how do I get this to, this is my memoir. This is, you know, like the story of my brother's death. Or another one I really like is Marina Benjamin's book about insomnia, which is called Insomnia. So again, you know, from the beginning, it's life writing, but it's through the lens of not being able to sleep. So it's, I think it's helpful for people to get a handle on what they're doing. And even the same, you know, even that the same subject, like even writing about my brother, that could have been lots of different books and I could have approached it in lots of different ways. Like if I was a different person, like one of the editors who was interested in it wanted me to write it, you know, she also wanted me to write a history of traumatic brain injury. I mean, I knew I was never going to want to do that because I don't have that kind of journalistic mind. I don't want to do that kind of writing. I wanted to write something that was, and I always want to write something that is hyper personal. I feel very clear in my own mind now that I want to write about an experience I've had, almost like with the review of them reporting it back. I went there, I experienced this, here's what I saw, do what you will with it. That's my kind of, that's the way I feel I set out my stall with what I'm trying to do. And very much that, rather than been alive for 49 years and I'm going to tell you about them all in chronological and extreme detail.
It is really interesting what you were saying about getting it all done, literally writing it all down, like your book says. We had a question from Brian O'Mara, who says, I've got books full of notes and ideas, but when I start to write my memoir, I'm not sure what the story should be. How do I work out what to include and what to leave out so I don't end up with 800 pages no one wants to read?
That's a nice follow on the last question, isn't it? I mean, on the first thing I would say is that you really want to sell it. Like sometimes then you can feel bad about the fact that you're in this situation. Whereas I would think, like, take a moment to think, isn't it great that I've got all this stuff? Isn't it good that I've done all this stuff? One of the ways I think about this is when we've got like notebooks full of stuff, I find this helpful to think of that as like a content bin. So I've got a container full of content. And then the next stage, if I'm thinking about at some point having a reader, at some point turning it into a book, is I've got to turn that container of content into something that more resembles a journey. And I think that can be a helpful first question. And probably also, again, to kind of narrow it down a bit, which might help. That, I mean, obviously, I just showed you a few memoirs. I think it can be really helpful to go into a bookshop or a library, look at a table of memoir, and then think like, what is this one about? You know, like this one's about death. This one is about my father dying and then me having a relationship with a hawk. This one is about alcoholism. Look at the lenses other people have used in which to write about their life, and then you can kind of slightly play. I mean, a game. I'm always trying to gamify what I do to bring more curiosity and joy and less sort of fear and stress. Almost like set yourself a thing of, right, I'm gonna imagine I could write like 30 books. What would they all be? And then it'll get a bit funny because you'll start scraping the barrel. But out of that, you then might get a sense of, actually, I'm going to start seeing how I could assemble my ideas on this theme or on this subject or on this thing that happened. Another way I think about it is I feel like the sky is full of idea kites, you know, kites, all of which represent a different way a book could be, or different themes of your life. And then you just think, right, well, I'm going to just jump up and catch one by the tail and then see if I can think about how that would work and start putting that together. But to try and do it, you know, try and stay in feeling kind of pleased with yourself that you've got a lot of stuff and you've already been doing a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lovely image, the ideas bin. I think that's great. So have a good rummage around in there. And I always think that no matter how many drafts or pages you discard, that none of it's actually wasted because it all leads to something. And so I think if Brian is 800 pages, there's going to be a lot of good stuff in there that he'll be able to. Yeah,
I completely agree with that. And I've up until my last book, the writing book, I've overwritten all my books. Like so many more thousands of words have existed that have gone into like quite, you know, and my books are short, you know, I don't write long books, but I've written a lot more. And I used to think like, oh, if only I was a better writer, I'd waste less. And I don't think that anymore. I think that every single word I've ever written had a purpose that was bringing, again, funneling my ideas, working out what it was I wanted to say.
Yeah. So I think the take home from that is people shouldn't feel disheartened if they're just writing reams and reams and reams of stuff that doesn't actually make it into their final draft.
Yeah, I think it's a necessary stage. And then you often find it ends up elsewhere, not necessarily in a, I didn't cut and, you know, I overwrote my first book a lot. I didn't cut and paste it into subsequent books, but you actually identify, when you edit a first book, I mean, I didn't really realize this at the time, but one of the things it does for you is you are realizing what your other interests are. So it was really in editing my first book that I did think like, gosh, I've got an awful lot to say about depression and family legacy that I don't actually think fits here. And that kind of became a manual for heartache. And also in both cases, lots more I'd like to say about reading that doesn't really fit here. And that became Dear Reader. Loads of stuff about marriage and parenting and day-to-day difficulties, daily life. I decided I didn't want to write that in a non-fiction way. I didn't think it was fair. So again, that kind of, those preoccupations went into my novel, you know. So it's kind of, whenever you take something out of something, and don't ever throw anything away, obviously. So when I always say like, you have to cut and slash and burn, I don't mean like literally, you just save it in another folder. And then my friend Kit Duval calls it the scraps of genius file. When you've got something, it's really good, isn't it? Really, really helps you. Because I mean, so often you'll have some kind of like little bit, couple of pages or even a chapter and you think like, oh, I love it so much, but a bit of you also knows it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit where it is. And yeah, it's definitely helped me having the Scraps of Genius file. And what I realized from the Scraps of Genius file is quite often what's in, if you're ever then looking for a new project, the first place to look is the Scraps of Genius file, because quite often you think like, oh yes,
that's so good.
Didn't quite fit in that other novel, but I wonder if I should now give him his own thing and let him breathe. And that's the way that a cut actually becomes new growth. Full of gardening metaphors at the moment.
Oh, I love a gardening. Gardening metaphors and running metaphors. I'm all over them. Yeah, I think everybody's going to be rushing and setting up a Scraps of Genius folder on their desktops now. I know I will be. You mentioned your novel. We have another question from Julia Sanchez, who says, I've written a so far unpublished novel, but I'd like to try writing a memoir about my time living in a small town in Costa Rica. Are there any similarities between writing fiction and writing a memoir? And if so, what are they?
Well, there's lots. I think basic storytelling, I think, is actually pretty similar for both. So just the idea that you are trying to take something that you think and then try to make that interesting to someone else. Things like world building, things like characterization, like how to put someone on the page. I think that if you set the broad difference that if this is a memoir, this is based on stuff that's actually happened to me, and I think a lot of it's in the intention. With a memoir, the intention is that I'm trying to tell the truth, with the usual caveats that truth is subjective. Memoir, I am actually saying this happened, this is how I saw what happened. Fiction, what you're saying is I've made all this up. But still, the way in which we make that enjoyable to read, I think fairly the same. So whether I'm trying to write a fictional place, put a fictional place on the page, or a real place on the page, I'm doing the same thing, which is I'm trying to describe, I'm trying to remember like what the smell was like and how the floorboards creaked under my feet, to kind of give the sense of putting the reader in the room. So I think loads of the storytelling stuff is the same. The advantage of fiction, I think, is that you can do what you like. So, but then I also, for me, the disadvantages of fiction are that you can do what you like. I really struggle when I haven't got any parameters. Again, I could be one of those people who never finishes anything because they're just sort of endlessly kind of, they've gone off on endless tangents, and there's this great sprawling thing that exists. That could incredibly easily be me. So I need to work out. With fiction, I have to artificially give myself some kind of a parameter, whereas with memoir, real life tends to give you that. Like there's a limit to, or again, even then though, you trying to sort out, okay, well, I'm interested in these 12 things. Which one of them am I going to try and write about first? So I think that and the skills you learn for both of them, again, quite the same. How to make dialogue realistic, same skills, whether you're making it up or whether you're trying to report back what you saw. So I think there's a lot of transferable skills to be had.
Oh, that's good. So hopefully lots of people who have written fiction and they would like to try having memoir, go memoir writing, they will be inspired to do that. And we hope they do. I have a question from James Stapleton here, who says, I've been working on my memoir for nearly 2 years and have found it really cathartic, but I often worry that no one will ever be interested in reading about my life. Is this something that plagues all memoir writers?
Yes, I think it does. And it still plagues me all the time. I think people often think that because, I have written books and people like them, that I no longer worry that people won't like what I write or won't be interested in what I write. But several times a day when I'm writing, it's something like this, something like, oh God, this is awful. This is awful. Why am I doing it? Why am I just doing this to myself? Why don't I get a proper job that would have colleagues? Other things. Why am I so lonely and I hate it and hate it and hate it? And then every so often, not quite, and it's mainly that, and this is dreadful and this is awful, I'm not getting anywhere with this. Then every so often a bit of like, oh, that sentence is rather nice. Maybe I'm a bit of a genius. So it's sort of like, oh, and then kind of like, oh. But I think that I think it is that creative vacillation that's just absolutely par for the course. And the main thing I know through having books published and having books, you know, objectively successful, sort of makes me feel a bit of an idiot to point that out, but you know, don't like to blow my own trumpet, but I have, you know, I've written books that people like. What that has taught me is that it doesn't matter how many people like my books, the main barrier I'm going to have to overcome is my problem with myself. You know, my self-doubt has not been cured by the outside world liking me. And now I've kind of given up on the fact that it will be, which paradoxically, as soon as I've sort of accepted that I'm always going to have a bit of jabber, I'm better able just to ignore it and get on with my work. So I wouldn't worry if you often think your work is pointless. Well, your work is pointless and awful, and you're pointless and awful, because that sadly does seem to be part of the creative process. So the trick is just to minimize the amount of energy you spend on it. And also I would say this to myself as well, so what, I mean, maybe write it for 10 years. So what if nobody ever likes it? As long as you feel, you know, you said you're enjoying it and finding cathartic. So enjoy that. And then the rest is a different thing. These days, I try to really separate my own sense of satisfaction at my work, which is mainly about getting it done. It's not about me thinking it's great. It's about the fact that I've done it. I've wrestled it. This was hard. It would have been easier to eat sweets and read someone else's book, but I have done this. Go me. That's what I'm looking for. And I separate that from, oh, and now other people think it's good and other people like me and are going to give me money or praise, because that is also, obviously, that comes with, it's sort of brilliant, and also comes with another host of problems, because then the ego gets involved. And you know, so I try to separate the two things.
Oh God, it's not particularly comforting, I have to say, to know that even when you've been as successful as you have, that you're still plagued with doubt like that, and it vacillates the up and down, up and down.
It's interesting, isn't it? I do.
I'm sure everybody listening will.
I often say to people, like,
feelings.
I hope I'm not putting people off, because I don't want to put people off, but I think it's useful to know, because before I was published, when I thought I just used to listen to the voice in my head telling me I was useless. And the thing I know now is that's just part of it. It's just part of, somehow it just seems to be part of creativity. It's a shame. And I still hope I might learn how to fix it. And if I do, I'll tell everyone. But what I really want people to know, what I want from our nice questioner there, is I don't want him to give up because he thinks that, because he gives objective weight to what it is he's saying to himself. And I think that's the kind of mind-blowing secret of it all. So it's kind of it is a bit depressing to think, like, gosh, I wonder, like, even if I do that and that, I'm still going to wake up feeling a bit rubbish. It's like, well, yeah, it's just, there's a word for it I learned, which is quite fun, or a phrase. It's called arrival fallacy. So this is the idea that we all think that something is going to fix us, whether it's, the Porsche on the drive. It's why people make mistakes, don't they, in terms of getting married when they shouldn't. The Porsche on the drive, the wedding, whatever. It's like whatever you think. We all have a thing that we think is going to make us feel good. So getting our book published, and then we get the thing, and then we think, oh, actually, I'm the same person I was before. I just now have had a book published, or a Porsche, or I've got married, or whatever. So, and then you can get on with really working out life now that you're no longer chasing after an external thing that you think is going to fix you.
I absolutely loved writing it all down. I laughed out loud at so many bits and recognized myself in virtually every page there, the plaguing with self-doubt, the blocks they're put in the way. And I think my absolute favorite quote was, I can't remember it exactly, so I'll paraphrase. It was, once I realized I was never going to feel like sitting down and doing it, it made it a lot easier.
I know, because I was ruining my life with it. Because I had thought that the only problem I had with writing was worrying about whether or not people would like it enough to publish me. Then I got published, and then I was like, but why am I not enjoying it more now? Why am I not just sort of like floating around in a pair of silk pajamas, kind of, enjoying the satisfaction of being a published writer and loads of people saying I'm great? And yeah, oh gosh, well. And then when I realized that wasn't gonna, I was never gonna, I don't think, get to a point where, you know, it's the thing with my writing. I'd always rather be doing something else, really. The lazy bit of me, well, not even the lazy bit of me, the bit that would rather be, there's a really good habit book. I think it's in there. It's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And I write about a couple of things, didn't write it all down. But I think there's a bit he says, which is, you know, there is a part of us that always wants to feel full, satisfied, stroked, comforted. That part does not want to write a book because writing books is hard. You know, that part doesn't want to go swimming or go running or learn to cook something new. That part just wants to kind of sit around and have treats. So
I think, yes, it was another favorite line of mine was it's something about I'm never going to feel like it. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's just pretty much it. Just accept it.
Yeah.
Never going to feel like it. Never going to feel like it. So the very, very refreshing and liberating thing about that is once you accept that you're never going to feel like it, you just get on with your work.
Yes.
Then I do feel loads better because it's just the starting, really. It's the start bit is the bit where it's like, oh, why am I doing this? And shouldn't I be doing that? And am I writing the right thing? And, you know, but I just now know that I'm never going to feel like it. And I might not enjoy the first bit. If I just keep going, I will really like it. And the way I do think about it now is, this might not be true for everybody, but for me, writing is really good for me. Not because I am enjoying doing it, but it's just really good for me. So these days I just do think of it like, you know, it's my anti-anxiety medication. If I take my 2-hour shaped pill of writing, then I just feel calmer and more able to enjoy the rest of my day, more able to enjoy life. Writing somehow takes the fidget out of me, that restless, you know, that restless sort of edgy, something's wrong, what must I do to fix it, what am I not doing? It just kind of chills me out by doing it.
And did it take a long time to get to that stage? Did you develop your daily writing habit and have to stick to it for a long time before you knew that it was something you had to exercise every day?
Yeah, probably because probably because I was wasting all my energy on thinking I had to learn how to enjoy it. So that's when I was trying to do when I was swimming, going in the sea in the cold, which again I wanted to swim through the winter. I didn't succeed because I got ill, not through the swimming. I just got ill in January and then kind of couldn't do it. But what I was doing, my little mantra as I was going into the sea, I thought it was quite a good one for writing. It was just like, I don't have to like it, I just have to do it. And again, I realized for me, I'd spend a lot of time getting caught in an argument with myself about whether or not I was going to do it. Like, right, I've said I'm going to write today, so I'm going to do it. Like, are you sure? You sure it's the right thing to do? Are you sure? You know, you make very prone to being persuaded. It's sort of it's kind of the flip side of the addict brain, I think, because I think it's a similar thinking mechanism to when you don't want to, getting yourself to do something that you know is good for you, but that is quite hard. I think it's a similar sort of thought process to when you don't want to do something that you know is bad for you, but is quite immediately gratifying, like say with me and alcohol. And what I needed to do there again was just stop having the conversation with myself all the time. Just had to be, nope, I don't have to enjoy not doing it, I just have to not do it. And it's the same sort of thing with the writing. I don't have to like it, I just have to do it. Of course, with the writing, as long as I will start doing it, I kind of will start liking it. But it's almost like not the point, because again, it's like I'm telling you all this in hope it's useful to you, but I don't want my own brain to catch on to what I'm doing. You know, I don't want my own brain to start saying like, yeah, but you told them you started enjoying it. You've now been doing this for 48 minutes and you're not enjoying it, so maybe you should stop. It's like, I'm not going there. I'm sticking to my thing of doing my 2 hours, whether I like it or not.
And it's interesting, going back to running analogies we were talking about earlier, that I've run for a long time, and some days I go out and it's just really, really hard work and I hate it. But most days I don't. I really enjoy it. But it's just living with the bad days of that. Was just at the end of the day, it was only an hour, and you know, at least it was exercise. And I suppose there were writing days like that as well, that some days I'm actually really enjoying this, doesn't actually come, it's just a slog and you don't get anything you feel is very worthwhile down.
Yeah, and I think that I don't have a definitive answer for this, because there's definitely a point where I find it really difficult to distinguish again, where's the line between I don't really feel like it and like I'm actually really ill and just
Yeah.
again, I'm not very good at knowing where the barrier is between those two things. But even with that caveat, I think that with writing, the gritty days are probably part of the process. But I mean, I don't mean to lead people astray. When I say my 2 hours every day, I don't do 2 hours of writing like 365 days a year. I tend to, like, I'll think like, right, this week I'm gonna write in the mornings, and then I might have a week off. And during that week, when I say have a week off, I'll do other work, not try to create, dredge new work out of myself. I do think writing stuff, when I'm writing things that are new, the beginning bits are so tiring. I feel like it is. I'm like trying to claw crystals out of a rock face or something. It's really tiring, and I do need to rest. So for me, it's more about, I think about what I want to do, make a commitment to do it, and then have to keep that commitment. So that's the sort of the important bit. But actually, one of the things I've had to get better at is factoring in rest. But probably because of a lot of our people that we're talking to today will have jobs and commitments. When I did as well. I mean, I always also think it's really important to kind of slightly remind myself and everyone else that, I wrote The Last Act of Love whilst I was working more than full time and had a toddler. I mean, I don't know how I did it, but it exists, so I must have done it. But what I would say is I did think really carefully about when to do the work. So like when I was trying to do it after I'd done everything else, I just couldn't do it. I was too tired. I was like trying to write it on Saturday nights and stuff. But then I realized that if I could do other things on Saturday nights. So what I needed to do was try and find little pockets of 2 hours that I could do on like Tuesday mornings, Thursday mornings, because then I could do other things. I could work late at my actual job, but I couldn't do my job. Like I couldn't work from 9 till 5 and then have enough oomph to write a memoir, but I could write from 6 till 8 in the morning and then have enough oomph to do work, if you see what I mean. So it's an awful lot of my writing, practically how I've got work done, has been thinking about it that way round. So having said you've got to do it when you don't feel like it, I don't try to write when I'm too tired. So that first thing in the morning works for me, even if it means I've got to get up like really early. Again, I don't do that in a consistent way, but every so often I will get up at 5 o'clock every morning and write from 5 till 7. Not often, because again, it's too tiring. I can't really sustain it. Some people do that. And of course, also really important to work out, you've got to find your own way. So I do know writers who do write. I mean, Kit Duval, who I mentioned earlier on, I think she doesn't really start till about midnight. So again, if I try to do that, I'd never get anything done. But it works for her, so I'm not saying, I think with all writing advice, the important thing is you listen to the person and then you just think, okay, what of that can I use for myself? But it's always up to you, the writer, to work out what you can do with that according to your own circumstances, or trying it or whatever. I quite like trying when those sort of articles which are like how I do it or whatever. I'll quite often like try someone else's way for a bit and then see how that works. And usually doesn't work as well for me as just doing it first thing in the morning with no messing.
It's interesting that you don't do it exactly the same every day, because I think there's a sort of a belief that, if you want to, if you're really serious about your craft, you sit down at 6 o'clock every morning, you do 6 till 9 or something before you then go off and do the rest of your day. But it's interesting that you say, this week I'll do mornings, and sometimes I'll do afternoons or other times. And
well, no, if I'm writing new work, if I'm writing new work, I will do it in the mornings. That's the thing. I don't do it. I find sleep resets me, and then I've got a good morning brain, and then I can go for it. But again, it's just like the realities of life, that if I'm, I used to try and also do that whilst I was like traveling, and I just found it too hard. It was just too difficult. And I'm always tinkering around the edges of what I do. But I think I was saying this to someone recently, I think before you get published, most of your energy goes into wondering about whether or not you'll get published. And then after you get published, most of your energy goes into how you're going to get the work done.
Oh, well, with people getting the work done in mind, would you be able to just let us know, just to finish, what will you be looking for in the memoirs that you read this year?
Well, so I do think voice is, for me, the most important thing. And what I mean by voice is it's just the sense of personality and presence on the page. That for me is the most important thing. Do I want to spend 70,000 words with this person? And what I would say is I judged a competition once, and so many of the openings were really quite unpleasant and violent. And I think it's because there's this idea out there that you should grab the reader's attention. And it's not that it's not a good idea to grab the reader's attention, but after reading, I mean, I felt quite scarred actually by reading all these horrible things. I think that it's more that you earn the readers, obviously there's difficult things in some of my books, particularly in The Last Act of Love, but I think you kind of earn the right to, like, you want to have a relationship with the reader first before you hit them with your most traumatic material. And I'm saying that because, again, I think just people have been advised the other way around. And after reading all these entries, I felt like, oh gosh, I just want to read a paragraph and just think like, yes, I can settle in with this person and spend a couple of hours with them, rather than like, oh no, well, please don't say that to me. We've only just met. Don't put that image in my head. So it was also, that competition was the one where I coined, I think, the very valuable advice, which is don't put your penis in the first paragraph. Yeah. See, having said that, there's a book where there's one of there are always exceptions to any kind of rules. I mean, there are sort of no rules really, but The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson does start
yes.
sexual bang. So but in general, I think that it's sort of safer not to it's sort of slightly safer not to start with something that's too high octane, I suppose. So yes, so that's what I'm looking for: voice, personality, and presence. And then the other thing I would say about openings is almost all openings, they're too complex. Most openings, there's too much going on, there's too many people. Really, at the beginning of a memoir, we want to meet the main person, which is probably you, the memoirist, the I, maybe like one or two other people, but we probably don't want to meet 12 people in the first couple of pages. So I realize I framed that slightly negatively in terms of where I feel people go wrong, but it's because I just want to reinforce people that what I'll be looking for is just them, just the sense of a person on the page. And then, yeah, it's that really, personality and presence on the page. And I think you've got to trust in yourself, really. I think of this thing of the memoir equation. So it's you plus what's happened to you, which gives the story its uniqueness. So I'm not interested in just reading. I mean, there are obviously subjects I'm more interested in than others, but I don't want to read what anyone thinks about what's happened to you. I want to read your experience of what's happened to you, because I think that's where the magic is. I think that's where the chemistry is. And don't try and sound like anyone else. Just focus on trying to really sound like yourself. Even if, and then if you think like, well, if I tried to sound like myself, she wouldn't like me. Well, tough, be bold enough to make that decision that you're going to really sound like you. If I don't like that, that's my hard cheese. You can enter other competition, do other things, but it's that sense of confidence in, I'm going to put my time and effort and energy on this planet into working out what it is I want to say. And then I'm going to offer it to you, and you do what you will with it. It's that sort of thing, I suppose.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great advice. Thank you very much indeed. And we really look forward to working with you this year. And I'm sure that this will give people lots of food for thought as they start to get their memoirs together for the competition. Our memoir competition will be opening on the 15th of June this year, and there'll be more information about it very shortly on our website. But I'd just like to say huge thanks, Cathy, for giving us your time this afternoon. It's been wonderful speaking to you. And
well, it's a great pleasure, and I'm really, it excites me profoundly to think of people out there, you know, sharpening their pencils.
Yeah, it's huge. I've been running this competition for a long time. It's enormously exciting doing a new category and memoir. I'm just so excited about what we're going to get to see this summer. It's going to be great.
So good luck to everyone. And,
thank you.
just do it. Remember, just do it. Just enter it. See what happens.